Video. It's one of the biggest things that people talk about these days for podcasting because it feels like video is all the rage in the digital world. For podcasting, you see clips of those interviews on social media. You hear of big names creating a studio and filming their podcast. You also see people talking with microphones. Like that visual aspect of a podcast is people with microphones. So the lines of audio-first podcasting versus video podcasts are kind of blurring. But are they really? What's driving this need for video? And is it worth it for you as a podcaster to create a video for your podcast? I touched on this a little bit in episode 89. That's the episode on your podcasting questions answered as my last episode of 2024. But I wanted to bring this topic back up for an entire episode of its own because, like I said, there's so much talk about video these days that I wanted to address it. But like anything in tech, things change quickly. So know that this is recorded in March of 2025, and I may have a new episode in the future for more video talk because I'm sure this isn't the end of it. And I'm sure that there's a lot more things I want to add, but there's only so much that can go into this short little solo episode. So as of today, I figure let's talk video podcasts as of right now, and are they right for you? And how you can potentially integrate video into your podcasting workflow if you choose to record visuals as well. This is episode number 92 of the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. So let's go. Hey, welcome to the show. Thanks for listening. Yeah, we're going to talk about video. The appeal of video for podcasting is growing. It's making a huge shift. And you know what? It actually started a while ago, too. Spotify started to offer video podcasts in 2020. So that's 5 years ago now. Toward the end of last year, Spotify reported that more than 50% of their creators are actively publishing videos monthly on Spotify. But video for podcasting isn't new. There's been a version of that called vidcasts or videocasts that have been around since the early 2000s. So why the push now? Why video podcasts today? And it all has to do with tech, right? With the rise of TikTok, YouTube focusing on podcasting, which they started in about 2023, so 2 years ago now. And of course, the integration of easily recording video. It's so accessible for everyone now. Cameras on laptops, your devices, your phones, right? Easily bought camera gear that is, accessible. You can go to a store and just pick up some stuff, and it's a pretty good price point for the pretty good quality. Video's point of entry has gotten easier and easier over the years. So that brings us to today. It is easy to record your podcast online with platforms like Riverside, Squadcast, Zencaster, even straight into your phone. And then easily take that video and drop it into YouTube. Video, podcast, done, right? Check. But in fact, many of those platforms come with AI as well. So they can cut your interviews into bite-sized little clips. And some of my clients, seeing all of this on those video platforms like Riverside, Squadcast, Zencaster, etc., they're asking me about video for their podcasts. Should I be recording video too? They used it mainly just to facilitate the conversation with that video portion, but they never published the video. But now they're asking about doing that. So with all these new tools, it sounds like a no-brainer. I mean, it's already there. You can easily just record it with hit another button, right? But is it really that easy? Or maybe the question is video really that effective for your podcast? So I want to make my first argument here that making a video podcast is not as easy as it sounds. It's not like, okay, we're hitting record anyway, might as well just record video for it. Bang, you're done. Video podcast isn't easy, especially in terms of creating one that is engaging. Because today in our world of video, Zoom, conferences, all that stuff, are we really exciting to see talking heads talk back and forth? Does that make for a good video? So sure, anyone can record video, but to have video of a certain quality that also has good audio, because if video doesn't have good audio, people are going to turn that off. So a good video with good audio doesn't come easily. There's a lot of setup and different workflows to make sure that not only are you recording your audio, but you are also going to be recording your video now. It's an additional step, or multiple steps, as you'll hear. You have to think about camera. Are you going to use more than what that camera is already on your laptop? Do you have to get a separate webcam? The quality of that webcam, the tech aspects of it all, better lighting, especially when we're getting into daylight savings and it's darker later in the day and you might be recording episodes later in the day as well. Lighting is great. You need that. What's your background going to look like? Some people are still recording their podcasts in their closet. Do they want to have their closet in the background? And then, talking about closets, what are you going to wear? You got to wear something from like waist up at least, right, in your video. So you got to put on some decent clothes. And if you're inclined to, also put on some makeup and even wash your hair. Make sure it's a hair washing night the day before you do your podcast, right? That's a lot of extra effort. You might not have thought about all that, but the little details and nuances that it takes, not just your time, but that mental capacity to get ready for a video. I mean, you don't have to wash your hair, but I bet most of you will think twice about how you look if you know there's going to be a video portion to any recording, right? We're going to put in that extra effort to look a certain way because it's just human nature in us to want to look presentable on a stage that is going to be recorded. So although there are many tools to facilitate the video recording process, it makes things easier these days, you still have to think about what's going to happen after you record that video. What happens next? So we're talking about how you're going to edit it. Will you be creating a thumbnail? YouTube likes to see thumbnails. Do you have to go the YouTube route? What are their rules? Back to the editing, what sort of edits will you make? Will it just be the two heads side by side? Or will you have multiple camera angles that you can make those smooth edits and jump from one person to the next? There's also the publishing side after the edits. Many podcast hosting companies don't host the video, so you'll have to take an additional step or two to upload that video to YouTube or Spotify or wherever you want to host your video podcast versions. And then we get to those video clips too, because video clips are part of that promotion, that marketing of your episode. Are you using those types of video for your podcast? Since you've recorded the interview, the episode, you might as well use that clip, right? We're talking about reusing content, so get some video clips out on social media. Another thing to add to the list. But again, we'll get into more of those video clips later. But just to say first that although recording video might sound easy, there's a lot of steps you need to consider before hitting that additional record button. I think the next thing we need to also consider is your listener. Is your listener going to be the same as a podcast viewer for the video? Sounds Profitable. It's an organization that I follow. They had some great research on the comparisons of audio versus video podcast consumption. They were saying that, and music to my ears, of course, the majority of podcast consumers listen mainly to audio versus video. However, in that same report, they did say the two audiences are not that drastically different. But I still beg to differ because, sure, I can see how an audio listener could also be a podcast viewer. I've done that. Sometimes I'll see a podcast on YouTube, but then I'll go back to my podcast player app and listen to it there. And I do know of people who prefer YouTube versus listening to a podcast. They like that the video is also passive. They can look at it if they want to. It's in the background. But one of the main differences I think that a lot of researchers might be missing here is those habits. Why one listener would choose one format over the other. And it's not just a audio first, video only, video passive. Some people like to look at faces sort of a thing, but actually their habits and why they choose one over the other. You know, think about it yourself. How and when do you use YouTube versus using your podcast listening app? Or just why do you use YouTube? You know, for me, I use YouTube for two very different things. One, I might be looking for very specific information. I'll scan what I need and I'll watch for that one small thing. An example could be like cooking, right? I want to see a technique. Or doing home renovations, I want to see the technique for that as well. There's that whole visual aspect. so that those videos are great. I can look for exactly what I want in that video, that specific part, and then close that video and get out. The number 2 reason for me to look at YouTube is entertainment. I don't actually want to turn on the TV or Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever streaming service you have and be bombarded by all the options. The nice thing about YouTube is that it's mind-numbing. You can just go there and their algorithm's pretty good for choosing what you want to watch next. So it's very passive. And I think that's why YouTube works so well. On the other hand, listening to a podcast on YouTube prevents me from multitasking, which is what I love. And I am an audio-first person. And I feel like that's why audio consumption is higher on an audio-only platform, because you have that convenience of listening to podcasts without the video. And I don't have YouTube Premium. So if I want to listen to a podcast without the video, I still have to keep my screen on, even though I put it in my pocket or something. The video is still playing in the background. But the beautiful thing about that convenience of audio-only podcasts is that you can go for a walk, work in the garden, be at the gym, walk your dog, commuting. It's all about multitasking while listening to a podcast. And with video podcasts, it's hard because I'm either starting and stopping because I missed something, either visually, or the audio isn't as great when there is a video-only podcast and I have to rewind. Or maybe I'm doing dishes and my hands are wet and I can't rewind anyway because the touch screen doesn't work with wet hands. So I can't even rewind the darn thing. It's got a level of annoyance for long-term dedicated listening. Or at least for me. Is it for you? I'd love to know. But okay, back to listeners, audio podcast listeners. Each show is going to be very, very different. So for your show, you need to gauge and research what's your audience's preferred platform and habits. Are they even asking for a YouTube feed? Do they use YouTube a lot for this long-term listening? Not like that mind-numbing stuff that I was talking to you about and how I use YouTube. Would they prefer to read something that's digestible, like a blog on your website? There's other ways to consume that podcast content that this whole repurposing thing is good for, and video might not be a great repurpose for you for your podcast, but we can talk more about that later. Essentially, what is the end goal of the video in relation to the goal of your podcast? Meaning, if your goal of the podcast is to reach more listeners, sure, maybe video is the way to go. You have that great reach now with YouTube's search algorithm. But if your goal is to be a thought leader in your industry or to nurture your customers and clients, YouTube might not be those listeners' preferred platform. It's about figuring out your listeners' habits, how they listen, where they listen, and how can you create a show for their needs. Back to that foundational piece of starting your own podcast. Another reason why you're seeing more and more big names in the industry use video is because YouTube and Spotify want you to. They are pushing for this platform. And they have big pull. So they are changing the way their algorithm works and how they are curating the space to include video first. And when they've created a space where it feels like now you could be missing out if you don't do video too, that can hurt sometimes, right? You're like, ooh, but am I missing something? I want to get into this. Should I get into it? But let's get real. Just because a large tech company says video is the way to go, it doesn't mean you have to follow suit. There are other ways to market and grow your show without having to resort to high-tech, multi-camera, 1080p video files. And, oh my gosh, okay, 1080p video files. I was just thinking too, that those files are huge in comparison to an audio-only file. I'm talking about storage here. When you're doing video, you'll also start noticing a large uptake in your usage of data storage. Audio files don't take up a lot of space, but when you include that video portion, and depending on how it's encoded, meaning like 1080p, 720p, all that sort of stuff, the quality of your video, how long the episode is, the longer the episode, the bigger file it is, you can start getting into very, very large files. And podcasting media hosting platforms are not going to start hosting these very large files. That will cost them a lot of money. So that means you have that extra step of uploading the video as well to YouTube and Spotify, etc. Not a big problem with that extra step, but with that storage component, if you were sharing that file out and you have a team member who works on your podcast, it really can add up for you on the storage side, your Google Drive, your Dropbox, or wherever you store your files in the cloud. Videos take up a lot of storage real estate, and I don't think people really realize the kind of snowball effect of that. Unless you have like unlimited data storage somewhere, just remember videos will take up a lot more storage space. The last thing I'll say, and not to poo-poo on the whole video thing, because I can see the draw, I understand that visuals help. It's also a very inclusive piece for people who need those visual aids, and people do like to see faces. I do get that. But what I'm saying is you don't also have to produce a video podcast along with your audio podcast. Sure, you can record the video during the podcast recording and then use that to create the little teaser clips or the promotional clips to promote the episode and market your show. That's awesome, but that takes time too, making those clips. But again, I know there's also time shortened with the use of AI. So are those AI tools worth it as well? You might have to pay something else. You got to pay out to use some of these tools. So are those AI clips any better than human selected clips too? But again, if it's human selected, you're paying in time to make that happen as well. But in the short time that I've been doing a little bit of video testing for some of my clients to create those clips and market their show with it, the AI clips aren't as good as the human chosen clips. Sometimes the AI ones are choosing these weird clips that wasn't actually the main thought of the podcast. They may have mentioned the word a few times, but it wasn't the main theme to really draw out what a listener is really honing in on. And at the same time, even though you let the AI tools do the work, you still have to go in, adjust the captions for spelling. You know, everyone's names is spelled differently. You got that to look through too, and make sure that those clips are still on brand to your podcast. So there needs to be a human element to review the work of AI. But again, I can see the draw of using AI too. There's the benefits of time saving. Or if you don't have the funds to hire a team, they can essentially be a small team member for your podcast. But yet you still have to do the research on how effective video is and using AI in video is for your podcast. Do video clips convert those viewers into podcast listeners? Is the time you put into it actually worth it? And I think that's a conversation for another day, because I'm going to end this episode here. So let me know, are you using video for your podcasts? How do you watch video podcasts? If you even do. Like, I'm not a video podcast watcher, so let me know if you are and what's your draw behind that? Why do you like watching video podcasts? Drop me a voice note on my website, visiblevoicepodcast.com, or email is always a great way to get a hold of me, visiblevoicepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole video podcast. Are you a watcher? Are you not? Sort of debate. Next time on the podcast, we're talking visibility. How being a guest on someone else's podcast can make a huge impact, especially for women podcasters. Julie Fry is joining me on the show. She is the CEO of Your Expert Guest, and you'll learn about what's currently working in the industry when you're a guest on another podcast and how integral it really is if you host your own show to also be a guest on other people's shows. So join Julie and me on the next episode as we talk more about what's working in the industry today about podcast guesting and what are some of those things that everybody's still doing but we can move on from. So let's improve your guest experience with Julie Fry and me on the next episode. I'll talk to you then. Thank you so much for listening to the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a podcasting friend. And to reveal more voicing and podcasting tips, click on over to visiblevoicepodcast.com. Until next time. Let's go!